10:40 a.m. A massive explosion shook Russia's Ryazan region. Suddenly, a giant fireball rose into the sky over the Shilovski district of the region. The blast was so powerful that it shook not only the immediate area, but even the outer neighborhoods of the district. At that moment, when local residents realized that the tremor they thought was an earthquake had actually come from an explosion, windows had already been shattered, sirens had begun wailing, and people had rushed out into the streets in panic. Nobody could even understand what had happened. Soon, the sound of sirens from arriving fire and rescue teams could be heard in the area. Everyone thought that a Ukrainian drone had struck the gunpowder factory in Shilovski, but the reports coming from the airspace were even more intriguing, because there wasn't a single aircraft in the sky. That meant drones had no role in this explosion either. The main factory serving the Russian army in the Ryazan region had now been blown to pieces. In fact, the place where the incident occurred was not an ordinary industrial area. The gunpowder factory in Shilovski had long been one of the largest facilities supplying the Russian army's ammunition needs. Gunpowder is one of the most fundamental components of modern warfare, especially for artillery systems. Every single shell's ability to be fired depends on the stockpile of gunpowder. Therefore, any disruption here directly affects the firepower at the front. The factory itself had actually been very well concealed, an ideal position against a potential drone attack, since the area is flat and surrounded by forests. This type of geography makes it easier for factories to remain hidden in wooded areas. But at the same time, it also means that in the event of an accident, it can cause an incredibly massive forest fire. Yet this time, things were quite different. When the explosion occurred, not only did the factory's thick concrete walls collapse, but the surrounding forested area was destroyed, and the thin-walled houses nearby also suffered severe damage. In the first minutes, the incoming reports claimed that a Ukrainian drone had carried out the attack. Such strikes had been increasingly frequent inside Russia in recent months, with fuel depots and military air bases being primary targets. However, the reports monitoring air traffic quickly disproved this possibility. At the moment of the explosion, there was not a single drone in the sky. Radar data also showed no trace of any external attack in the area. At this point, the question grew even bigger. What then had triggered this disaster? The scale of the explosion was also revealed clearly in the numbers. According to the official statement, 24 people lost their lives, and more than 250 were injured. It also emerged that the factory's 4 main buildings had been completely destroyed. At least 300 tons of gunpowder were blown into the air, and no fewer than 600 rounds of 152mm artillery shells detonated. It was further revealed that the ammunition intended to be sent to the front was still inside the factory before shipment. With this explosion, the munitions that Russian troops at the front would have used for several weeks have now gone up in flames. This was, in fact, one of the main reasons why the blast was so devastating. The energy unleashed by the explosion was so immense that the fireball rising above the factory could be seen from dozens of kilometers away. The temperature reached thousands of degrees, and with the sudden ignition of the gunpowder, a massive pressure wave was created. This wave shattered windows in the outer neighborhoods of the district and set off car alarms. Footage that surfaced on social media illustrated the severity of the incident even more vividly. In videos recorded on cell phones, the black smoke rising into the sky was clearly visible, followed by the sound of second and third explosions. Eyewitnesses reported that even houses on the outskirts of the village shook. These accounts confirm that the blast was not confined to a single factory, but directly affected everything living in the surrounding area. So what really happened? Soon, a scenario emerged that even the official authorities came to acknowledge. The incident had most likely occurred as a result of an internal error. According to some rumors, one of the workers was smoking at a critical spot. That spark triggered a chain reaction of explosions. Of course, it is difficult to confirm this claim since no solid evidence remained. However, similar cases that occurred in Russia in the past strengthen this possibility. In 2012, at the Dongguz test site near Orenburg, It is known that an improperly extinguished cigarette detonated 4,000 tons of ammunition within minutes. Unbelievable as it may sound, 4,000 tons of ammunition exploded at once because of a cigarette. In that incident, fragments from the explosion were scattered for kilometers, and even windows in houses 14 kilometers away were shattered. In other words, cigarette-related accidents are known to pose a very real risk in military ammunition depots. From this point on, the real issue is how the accident will affect the course of the war. In recent months, Russia has been trying to advance on the Ukrainian front through heavy use of artillery. The 152mm shells, in particular, are the backbone of this strategy. Therefore, the loss of this arsenal could at least temporarily reduce the intensity of artillery fire on the front. The absence of a few hundred shells might not make a difference on the battlefield in a single day, but the loss of hundreds all at once creates an impact that stretches over weeks. This could mean a breathing space for Ukraine along the front line. Of course, Moscow will take swift steps to compensate for this loss, increasing shipments from other factories, using supply routes through Belarus, or expanding gunpowder and ammunition support from Iran could all come into play. However, this process takes time. The chemical components used in the production of gunpowder, as well as the refining and drying processes, can take weeks or even months. In other words, filling the gap in the short term will not be easy. Another dimension of the incident is its impact on domestic public opinion in Russia. Immediately after the explosion, the first reaction was to blame Ukraine, an indication of the reflexes within the official narrative. But once radar and air reports disproved this possibility, the question arose among the public: have we lost our own safety? This is a situation that could also undermine confidence in the state's crisis management. At the same time, although attempts were made to censor the circulating footage on social media, the Russian people have already seen the scale of the blast with their own eyes. From a diplomatic perspective, this incident could work in Ukraine's favor. Russia, facing an ammunition shortage, not only eases the pressure on the battlefield, but also demonstrates to the West the vulnerability of Moscow's defense industry. On the other hand, Russia may try to present such accidents as external attacks in order to mobilize its own population. The enemy at our gates narrative can feed even off an accident like this. What is certain is that this explosion in Ryazan has gone down as one of the most severe industrial accidents in the region's history. The official figures confirmed 24 deaths, more than 150 injuries, the destruction of 4 factories, and the loss of hundreds of tons of ammunition. The remaining questions are still under investigation. Was it a cigarette, a technical failure, or a lack of oversight that triggered this disaster? Meanwhile, on the main front line, a very significant development took place on the evening of August 28th. Russian main assault groups moved to regain control of areas lost in recent days. This was followed by a critical maneuver, particularly on the Pokrovsk front. But in the rugged, partly forested terrain of Donetsk, as night was about to fall, the defensive units once again took the stage. The aerial reconnaissance teams of Ukraine's Ivan Franko group detected a Russian assault force advancing toward the settlements of Prohorez and Malinivka. In the footage, 7 armored vehicles and about 100 soldiers inside them were identified. The units detected here were particularly significant for the Russian army. In fact, these forces consisted of units that had previously taken part in the main assault groups responsible for retaking the Kursk region. In other words, reinforcements from the 155th Separate Guards Naval Brigade of the Pacific Fleet had been sent to the area and were now on the move. This region had only very recently been liberated by the Ukrainians, meaning the defensive line was not very strong. These Russian units sought to push forward directly by breaking through the defenses here. However, things did not go as planned for the Russians. The crew of the Ivan Franko group, working with incredible coordination, maintained real-time communication with HIMARS teams, while simultaneously coordinating with FPV drone operators on the ground. And those infamous HIMARS missiles, equipped with high technology and striking with sniper-like precision, began hitting their targets. The The Russian assault group was completely destroyed before it could reach the positions of the 79th Separate Air Assault Brigade, which had been its objective. In fact, the losses were extremely heavy. Although the exact numbers are not fully confirmed, reports indicate that between 50 and 100 Russian soldiers, essentially the entirety of the assault force, were neutralized as a result of the strike. In addition, it is worth noting that all the armored vehicles belonging to the mechanized unit involved in the attack were either destroyed or rendered unusable for future combat. So if you're asking why this clash is so important, the answer is that it's actually just a small piece of a much bigger picture, a larger Russian offensive, and ultimately, a major Russian defeat. In July and August, Russia launched a massive wave of attacks in the direction of Pokrovsk and Dobropilya. They gained some ground, breaking through Ukraine's defenses in certain places. Some Russian military blogs and analyst groups even wrote that they were trying to form a salient near the Dobropilya-Kramatorsk road and turn it into a base. However, the Ukrainian army, particularly the Eastern Joint Defense Forces, quickly regrouped. With reinforcements, they strengthened their defensive lines and launched a counteroffensive. The HIMARS strike I just described was a critical part of this larger counter move. Statements made in mid-August by Ukraine's commander-in-chief, General Sirski, and President Zelensky pointed directly to this success. Zelensky specifically praised the 79th and 82nd Air Assault Brigades, while Sirski announced that additional reinforcements had been sent to the region. And when it comes to strategic analysis, the situation is far from promising for the Russians. As Viktor Trehubov, spokesperson for the Dnipro Operational Strategic Forces Group, stated, the two claws that the Russians were trying to push forward have been cut off. In other words, the units in this salient, critical for the advance and highly vulnerable to encirclement, have been surrounded by Ukraine and severed from their main supply lines. Even if they are hiding in forested areas, their supplies and ammunition are running out, making their neutralization only a matter of time. This is one of the most feared scenarios in modern warfare. Supply lines cut and encirclement. We'll see what happens in the coming days. We have come to the end of another video. You can like the video to support us. By subscribing, you can easily follow new videos. I wish you all war-free days. See you.